Should all British high schools have airport-style security installed following the tragic murder of Anne Maguire?
Suzanne Evans.
The question was, should we have airport-style security in schools? And I absolutely agree with Connor and Simon, no. Laws made in haste are bad laws. When I was 15 years old, I went to a school exchange trip to France, and I spent a week in a French school. And I was horrified when I arrived. There was a high security fence around and security guards inside. And this was such a contrast to the beautiful rural school that I was privileged to go to in Shropshire. And I thought, please, may our schools in Britain never be like this.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you very much. I totally disagree with the fact that we should bring in airport-style scanners and all that. I think that would, it's very intimidating. I happen to work in the community, and I know Anne Maguire very well because I also work with the church. So what I think the government should be doing is, bringing in an intervention for these pupils. But nothing is being done to ensure that, the problems are resolved. The government is not doing anything. And there are so many cutbacks already, within the Department of Education, which is not, which has made a very negative impact on the schools and on the head teachers. Teachers have a problem time, with the children. Children don't listen anymore, so we all have to come in and intervene, and it's not working. It's really not working. And teachers also should be guaranteed safety in the school. I think policies should come into play in all these things.
What are your memories of her? You mentioned that you knew.
She was a fantastic woman. She was very God-fearing, and she liked instruments. She played instruments. She loved every pupil. She treated everybody as if they were her own children. She had a passion to ensure that every child succeeds in the school.
Okay. Yes.
In the light of recent news, is it fair to describe UKIP as a racist party?
Is it fair to describe UKIP, represented here by Suzanne Evans, as a racist party? Tim Farron.
I wouldn't say so. I think that clearly there are individuals within UKIP who have come to the fore with opinions that would make the BNP wince. And, of course, you've got Marine Le Pen from the French National Front, who's reached out to UKIP, and I guess there'll be a sense where that will be a source of great embarrassment. But I think it's wrong to start, playing the man rather than the ball. And
it was Labour that did this, wasn't it? It was Barbara Roach who said this.
I mean, my take is that, in one sense, UKIP's position, particularly on the issue of the European Union, is clear, and I kind of respect it, actually.
Just before I come to UKIP on this, what Barbara Roach said was they're deploying the same language and tactics used by openly racist parties like the BNP. Is that an accurate description?
Well, I've criticised the government for their go-home ads that they did last summer, which I think drew on the language of the national... Well, unfortunately, Tim, this is your government that is doing it. Well,
you didn't.
No.
You didn't. But the point is, the point is, when those bans were put up, the Labour opposition were totally silent. It took a Liberal Democrat to speak out against them.
Those ads were going round for months and months. You have Liberal Democrat ministers in the Home Office.
They went out for about 2 or 3 days and we stopped it.
No, that's not true, sadly. I wish it was the case, but it's sadly not.
And you didn't speak up against it.
Well, unfortunately, that's not true, Tim. And I think, trying to be outside the government when you are voting for every single thing that this government does just won't watch.
Suzanne Evans.
Thank you. No, UKIP is not a racist party. I would certainly not be in it if it were. And neither does it attract racists in particular. We're currently running in the European elections at 38%. So that means a good sort of just over a third of this audience, if you're a typical audience of the British voter, you'll be voting for UKIP, and technically that means you could be called racist.
I'm tempted to test this, but I don't think I will.
And I know you're not, and you know that you're not racist either. The problem that we've had is that UKIP has risen phenomenally, and therefore, quite rightly, we are being put under a huge amount of scrutiny. And I have no problem with scrutiny. Every person that stands for election for UKIP or any other party, I'm sure my colleagues would agree with me, must be subject to scrutiny. We cannot expect to stand for public office unless we are fit for public office. But it's got to be a fair playing field. Now, I'd like to ask the audience a question. How many of you in this audience know that 7 councillors in the London Borough of Harrow all of them black minority ethnic councillors, resigned from the Labour Party because they thought it was racist and discriminated against them. Hands up, how many of you know that?
Yeah, well,
right, practically none of you.
Yeah.
How many of you know...
You should maybe address it to Ms Cooper.
No, I'd just like to ask the audience...
Well, you can't go on asking the audience questions. They want to hear from you, not the other way round.
Well, OK, make the point. Nobody put their hand up. Nobody knows that. A serious issue. It didn't make the national headlines. It wasn't the lead story on the broadcast news. The fact is, and Barbara Roach, who we've talked about, has set up this campaign group. We know there are people going through our candidates' Twitter accounts. They're not doing it to the other party.
All right, Yvette Cooper, do you want to answer the charge?
Excess scrutiny.
Do you know about this?
I think there's always scrutiny of candidates, and rightly should be. Our view in the Labour Party is wherever we have any suggestion of racism, it should always be challenged, and that is my point about what UKIP need to do. Is they just need to expel candidates who are expressing racist views.
We do, and we have expelled them.
Simon Jenkins, do you want to come in on this?
The idea of vetting political candidates for being fruitcakes fascinates me. You wouldn't have many candidates left, some of the ones I know. I don't think it's a crime to be a fruitcake, and I sympathise with Suzanne. I mean, they are under extraordinary scrutiny at the moment. The thing that I worry is this word racist. It's a bit like there's some law which says that when you're beginning to lose an argument, you start mentioning Hitler. When you're beginning to lose an argument, you start mentioning racism. It's a very dangerous way of trying to resolve a reasonable political debate. And the reasonable political debate, to my mind, is about the nature of British borders, the nature of immigrants into this country, how far we can handle particular numbers of immigrants, what is the nature of citizenship in Britain. These are real questions which are not related to race. And I don't think it helps the debate about them, which many people have been concerned about for a long time now, largely ignored by the major political parties, to say those people who do raise them are racist. That's wrong.
And of course, there are Conservative councillors who've made offensive comments and been.
Of course, we all have people in our parties who emerge, and we get rid of them.
UKIP is the only party that will not allow former members of the BNP to join. We found one that had lied last week and we kicked him out straight away. The Conservatives have a former BNP member standing as a council candidate. The Lib Dems in Sutton have a councillor who's been convicted of racially aggravated assault. You know, I'm afraid we don't have the monopoly on stupidity here.
Canella saying that UKIP is not classed as a racist party, then that's fine, but do you not tend to agree that the way that you go about your campaign provokes the general public to be racist? I recently heard that when Nigel Farage was visiting Wales, the visit had to be stopped because of UKIP supporters and fellow people arguing over racism.
No. Can I just answer that? Because, no, I mean... Nigel Farage is possibly being stopped from speaking at public meetings at the moment because of anti-fascist groups, which frankly are among the most fascist people I've ever encountered. There is a hard wing in this party of anti-UKIP feeling people who want to completely shut down the debate. You know, they will not allow free speech. These people do have no interest in democracy, and that is something that UKIP stands for fundamentally.
All right.
And just a couple of quick figures. We're fielding 2,235 candidates in the local elections on the 22nd of May, more than we've ever fielded before. The amount of people that have been caught out doing something wrong so far, it's about 0.3%. Now, let's just put that into context. In 2011, 0.61% of members of Parliament were in prison. You know, we are doing a lot better than MPs in the House of Commons.
This lesson in statistics, I think we...
If UKIP are coming across as a racist party due to a few members saying some racist comments, does it mean that Labour are all fraudsters after the Dennis McShane scandal?
The mistake UKIP made was to go for immigration. It really was. It was about Europe. The election's about Europe. UKIP's about Europe. It's not about immigration. And I think it was a cynical decision of Nigel Farage's not to major on Europe, but to go on to immigration, because immigration is, in a sense, the politics of fear. And that's the last thing you want in politics.
But, Simon, immigration is what 70% of the people in this country tell us they're concerned about, and what 60% of black minority ethnic community people say they're worried about. Come on, we're politicians. We cannot ignore 70%
All right.
The major issue...
I think that we should be talking about immigration. Actually, Simon, I think we should be talking about immigration.
Do Ed Miliband's proposals on rent help or hinder the rental market?
The reason why private rents are high is because of a lack of supply. It's blindingly obvious. And amongst the things that, you know, the Labour Party should be embarrassed about in its 13 years in power is that they built fewer council houses than Margaret Thatcher.
We've got to build houses, we need far more homes, and we also need to do something to help the 9 million people who are in rented accommodation now across the country.
The issue is the supply of housing. It's not about how much, and it seems to be a Labour policy that is the same about energy prices. Let's cap it, that's the solution. Yeah. They don't address the real underlying issue. The underlying issue with energy prices as well was actually whilst Ed Miliband was in power, he brought in all these green taxes that put up the cost of energy.
Okay. And the man behind,
turning it on it.
The man behind you, and then I'll come to you, Conor. The man behind you.
What we need to do is to actually build more houses, not come out with these gimmicks that Labour seems to do all the time.
First of all, we're talking about the rental culture as if somehow that's wrong. I understand that in places like France it's perfectly normal to rent for most of a person's life. I also accept that there is a need for accommodation that's affordable. However, one of the things that we seem to be missing is that the builders, the developers, are wanting to do their new builds, and then these are not affordable houses, these are expensive houses, on land that was formerly green belt. That is going to be destroyed forever. There are places in many of the city centres now, old brownfield sites, that are ready to be redeveloped to make affordable homes for people who can live near where they work. That will not happen in the outer suburbs. All that will do is make the developers much, much more wealthy and will destroy our heritage, our children's and grandchildren's heritage, forever.
The idea that you increase the supply of rented accommodation by capping the rent is absurd. I mean, that is just illiterate economics. I just don't know what... I have to say, I am mildly in favour of some safeguards for tenants. I think that's reasonable. But the idea that you solve this problem by capping rents is Castroite, is absurd. But on the main thing, you will never...
Sorry, what do you mean by Castro-like?
Castro fixed all the rents in Havana, and no house has been restored for about 30 years. That's the way you want, if you want to wreck the housing market, cap price. But coming back to this question about housing, you will never ever build your way out of house price rises by simply allowing the fields to let rip. I mean, it is stupid. It destroys what we value about the countryside. It's not necessary. It's caving into a particular very powerful lobby at the moment, the house building lobby. And they all want the same thing. They want rural sites for 300 volume units of housing. And it's the most damaging thing to the British countryside we've seen since the last war. It mustn't happen.
Well, I don't want my countryside to be concreted over. At the moment, we need to build one house every 7 minutes in order to keep up with supply. And like it or not, migration is a factor in that. I mean, net migration is still at 212,000 a year, despite the fact that David Cameron promised to get it down to tens of thousands. And I don't think he's going to be able to do that and fulfil his manifesto promise by 2015 unless he completely shuts the borders down for everyone outside the EU. And I certainly don't want to see that happen. It is true that homelessness is now caused, in the main, by the ending of private tenancies. There is a problem here, and local authorities are really struggling. But this reactionary policy brought in by Ed Miliband today, which has already been described by experts as possibly one of the most stupidest policies ever invented, it really is not the answer.
Are the panel breathing a sigh of relief at the news that Jeremy Paxman is to leave Newsnight?
Suzanne Evans.
I'm very disappointed Paxman is going. Who can forget that time when he was questioning Michael Howard and he asked him the same question 12 times and Michael Howard still didn't answer? Fantastic. Yeah. We need people like that to give us politicians.
And it actually, I watched that because it was on today, and it wasn't the same question. It was cleverer than that. It was the same question put slightly differently a lot of the time. It wasn't just sitting there muttering the same old thing. It was a very, very good interview. And he did have, in the middle of it, he said, I don't want to be rude, but I have to ask this again. You know.
Oh, he was absolutely
I'm not trying to be
brilliant.
funny or anything, you know. It was one of those.
And I have been on Newsnight.
Less polite now.
I have been on Newsnight, and it was great to be there. And afterwards, I was able to tweet the immortal line, "I survived Paxman."
The panel thinks steps should be taken to protect workers on 0-hour and temporary
contracts. To protect workers on 0 hours and temporary contracts, which is, as we know, there are a lot of it about at the moment.
We recognise there is a problem. So we need to tackle those for whom 0 hours contracts are not the right thing and give them more protection.
Can you just define what the problem is? 'Cause I don't understand how you can have a contract if it doesn't say anything about how long you have to work. Well, how can you be under contract to somebody?
In a sense,
if they're not under an obligation to offer you work?
It's like the old thing you used to have in ports and so on, where people would turn up in the morning to see whether there was any work available that day. And for a lot of people, that's an absolutely unsustainable way to organise their lives, and particularly when we're encouraging people.
It's not unsustainable, Connor. It's completely immoral.
Absolutely. The workers' side of this contract, what are they saying they'll do? Be available any time.
Be available.
When ordered to come up, they'll come.
Be available.
And otherwise, they won't get any work at all. Yeah. That's the deal, isn't it?
And they won't get their travel expenses paid if they've travelled somewhere. They might be waiting hours between shifts. It's completely unacceptable to treat people like this. Yes, there might be the few tiny minority for whom it works, but I think Libby summed up the situation very well, and it really does have to change. But one thing that's been forgotten in this whole debate is that we can directly chart the massive increase in the use of 0 hours contract from the time that the EU agency workers regulations were introduced into this country. And that meant that temporary employees after 12 weeks had to be on exactly the same terms and conditions as a full-time employees. Now, of course, big businesses didn't like this, and 0 hours contracts was their way of getting around that particular piece of EU legislation. And that's why they have rocketed. I'm afraid, once again, we have the EU to blame for this one.
Gotta stop, I'm afraid. Our hour's up. Next week we're going to be in Southampton. Panel, Shirley Williams from the Liberal Democrats, Grant Shapps, Chairman of the Conservative Party, Chuka Umunna, Labour's Business Secretary, and guess who? Nigel Farage, leader of UKIP.